And we are live. Good morning, everybody. It's Friday. Congratulations. You made it through the week. Hope you had a great one. I know I did out here in Colorado with my good friend, Joe Laino. How you doing this morning, Joe?
And Bryan, how are you?
Good, good. And of course, Joe is with SCS Food Safety and is an amazing guest. So we're always happy to have him on. One of the things, if you're new to the food safety chat this morning, first of all, welcome. Go on in the chat there and let us know where you're at in the world, where things are. And it's always amazing. Right? I'm in Loveland, Colorado, where today, Joe, it's we got a little bit of rain, which was awesome. This morning it's 50 degrees. So it's to the point in the year I love May and September, in that you can open your windows up in the house and let the cool breeze in at night. And it's just good sleeping weather, and you don't have to scoop snow yet, right? Not a problem you have where you are, but I love it. How's the weather back there for you?
I woke up this morning, I went outside and it was like 52 degrees. It was 93 yesterday. So it's that time of year here in the Carolinas where we get 3 seasons in a week.
Exactly.
Take what you get.
Absolutely. So one of the things you'll notice here with this food safety chat is we talk about, of course, all things food safety, and that we'll pick a topic on a given week and we'll bring in an expert like Joe to talk about this topic. And it's interactive, right? This isn't a webinar presentation where we have all these fancy slides and things like that. Now, we do show examples and do some other fun things every now and then, but this is meant to be a discussion. So please let us know if you have any questions that we're going here. We love talking food safety. So before we get started, and so one of the things we need to do, and Joe's going to have an imaginary cup of coffee. So I'll want your corrective actions within root cause analysis within 15 working business days, please.
You got it.
Wonderful.
Running a little bit behind this morning, and I didn't have that.
Yeah, it happens to the best of us, right? So one of the things that we're going to talk about today is something that Joe and I are both intimately familiar with, and that's the world of auditing and how it works. And just, kind of high, because we kind of talked about that before in the past, but really we wanted to do on this kind of chat today more around the actual mechanics of an audit. Because one of the things, before we'll kind of preface it with this, to kind of set everything's up, right? So let's say your GFSI audited to SQF or BRC or one of those standards, and your audit day comes and you're ready and you have a brand new auditor. You've never met this person before. And immediately things start going off the rails, right? The auditor doesn't like how you're doing things. He doesn't like your proof that you're doing those things, and things are starting to go a little goofy. And so we wanted to kind of talk about what that looks like, because a lot of times, Joe, there's an impression out there that you're kind of stuck, right? If you get a bad auditor and you get a bad score and you don't think there's nothing you can do, but that's not true, right?
Right. And you and I were talking prior to coming online, is that auditors are human and there's going to be mistakes made. I equate it with getting pulled over by the police. Okay. And you're probably you're not getting pulled over because you were doing the speed limit. But you don't argue with the police on the scene, because it just makes things stickier. Okay. There's a process for having your say, having your day in court, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that's the process that I want to focus on. Is what to do if the audit should come off the rails, and it happens. Auditors are human. We make mistakes. I certainly would be naive to think that I catch everything. I try to do the best I can in the time that I have allotted. On a 2-day audit, there's an awful 17 programs to look at that generate 40 or 50 SOPs, and in a 30, 40, 50, 70,000 square foot plant, there's a lot of things to look at. So, but there is absolutely a process to, quote, air your grievances.
Absolutely. Yeah. So part of this is I wanted to kind of give everybody just a quick kind of high level overview of how audits actually work. And one of the things I just thought about here is I think I said Joe's company wrong, right? Because we were, a lot of these audit companies have very similar initials and things like that. So Joe's with CFS, Food Safety, right? As it's listed. Let's see if I can do this. As it's listed. There we go, down there. So apologies on that. So audits are interesting, right? In that there's two main buckets that I look at for audits, Joe. Let's see if you approach it this way too: accredited and non-accredited audits. And non-accredited audits, I can create an audit, right? So Bryan's food safety audit with Food Leadership Group, and I can go around and start auditing people and issuing certificates under my company letterhead and all of these type of things. And it's an audit, right? But it's non-accredited. Accredited audits have rules to follow. And really those two rules follow under two sets of ISO guidelines, ISO 17020 and 021. And these lay out the criteria if you want to be accredited. So if I went to an accreditation agency, so like Jazz Hands or ANSI or some of these other businesses with these acronyms, then they would audit me and say, okay, well, what are you auditing to? What are your programs? How do you deal with complaints? What's your management review process? All these type of things. So just like a manufacturing facility, auditing companies that are accredited need to have these programs, and they are audited as well.
Correct. And at last count, I think there was something in the neighborhood of 20 or so different certification bodies in the U.S. that are accredited. And as you mentioned, the two most commonly used accreditation agencies are JANS, which is, I'm going to get this right, Joint Accreditation Services Australia, New Zealand, and ANSI, which is the American National Standards Institute. I need to get a hobby.
And every time I hear Jazz Hands, I want to do this, Joe.
Jazz Hands. But they are the ones that certify the certification bodies to do the accredited audits. It's a whole, it's, as you mentioned, it's alphabet soup. There's all kinds of abbreviations, but that's how the process works.
Yep. So there's a standard that's created. So the Global Food Safety Initiative, for example, and then people can apply at a certification body to audit to that standard. And that's when you get into the rules of this accreditation. I always get that mixed up too. Accreditation or accreditation. Right? Which one is it? I always forget.
It's accreditation.
Dation. Okay. I don't know why I got tation stuck in my head. So, if I wanted to do SQF audits that are part of the GFSI portfolio of benchmark standards, meaning they meet those requirements, then I have to become accredited to that standard and meet all those rules before I can even do an audit, right? So I have to do all this work ahead of time to become accredited, and we'll stick with SQF. I have to get accredited to SQF and show them all my systems, and it's the third-party accreditation agency that does that, not SQF. So that's an interesting little behind-the-scenes thing that a lot of people don't necessarily see. So, and a certification body can be accredited to more than one standard, right? So SQF, right. BRC, you can do Costco audits, the addendums that go with those, these type of things. And a lot of times too, companies will also create their own audits, right? So like a GMP audit or things like this that aren't accredited, but are also available for companies that kind of want to start out and they're not ready yet to go to that full level to get up to an accredited audit.
Exactly. So as we always say, like a SQF or BRC, it's like a GMP on steroids. Okay.
Yeah.
And within the certification bodies having their own versions of GMP or GDP, good distribution practices audits, GFSI also has the global markets audit program, which is a similar concept to a GMP, but more focused on being compliant with the GFSI expectations.
Right.
So there's all different choices out there, and it's just a matter of what's going to work best for your business. What do your clients expect of you?
Exactly. And some certification bodies focus in on particular industries. So meat or baking or things like this. And so you need to find one that fits your business. And so part of this, right, is that you're the customer shopping, and the certification body is the business, right? They're the people that you're going to be paying for the audit. They're the people that are going to give the certificate that goes on the wall. They're the agency that's managing this whole process, right? They're the people that are the auditors work for, these type of things. The auditors do not work for SQF. The auditors do not work for GFSI. They work for a certification body.
Correct. That's right. And to that point, as we mentioned, you have to you talk to your customers and your client base, because you may have your largest customer maybe won't accept one particular audit. They want another one. Costco is a good example. If you're supplying Costco and you're having a GFSI audit, everybody probably knows you have a Costco addendum added on to your SQF or your BRC audit. In lieu of an addendum, they require a first-party GMP audit. It's their audit criteria. They also have an audit scheme for what they call small suppliers. It's the Costco small supplier audit. So there's all different types of customer-specific audits. That's why it's important you know what your customers are expecting.
Exactly, because if you go out and you get the wrong certification,
absolutely,
and your customer goes, "Sorry, I only accept BRC." Now you have to go and do it again. So
all that time, frankly, it's money, and it's just you're
just burning money at that point. So make sure you understand that. So just really quickly, then, what happens after an audit, right? So after the audit happens, the auditor will give you a draft. It's never the final version, right? And every good auditor will say during the closeout, okay, here's my idea of what the findings are for this, but this has to go for review, and then it'll come back, and then you have to do corrective actions. The auditor is responsible for following up on the corrective actions, which makes sense, right? They know what they were looking for. So let's say one of your findings was you had a cracked window in your back warehouse. So your corrective action would be, okay, I'm going to replace that window, and you would replace it and take a picture of it and send it to the auditor. And then you're going to add that to your inspection program to make sure it doesn't happen again, right? Plan, do, check, act. And at that point, the auditor will look at what you sent over and say, oh, okay, yeah, I'm okay with that. I'm going to close out this corrective action, right? And those all have to be closed out. And there's a certain period of time that has to take place in. After that, it goes back to the certification body for what they call technical review. And that's what Joe does a lot of work on as well, is that the audits come back, and then he will go through the findings of the auditor to make sure it makes sense. Right? Because sometimes auditors will put a deviation under the wrong section of the code. And you're like, no, this is not 232. This is 242 or something like that. Or what they wrote up doesn't make sense. It's like, okay, I can kind of see where you're going with this, Mr. Auditor, but this isn't clear enough. You need to rewrite this section. Right. So that internal review takes place. And then once that's done, then it goes back for certification, and then you get your certificates and all of those fun things.
On audits that are unaccredited, so that's usually in the GMP, GDP, 99 times out of 100, the certification body does not require you to submit to them corrective actions. Your client may want you to work corrective actions out and keep them in the loop, but the certification body doesn't require it. For accredited audits, it is required. And I think personally, if it's a GMP audit and you're not following up, at least internally, on corrective actions, then what's the purpose of having had the audit? I can go in and leave you a laundry list and say, all of this is bad, fix it. And then if you don't, then what's the point of having had the audit?
Right.
But the corrective action tool and process is really important. That's to me, that's the whole point of having the audit.
Absolutely. And yeah, why do it if you're not going to use it to improve?
Right. Are you seeing any comments come up?
No, I think we may have a technical issue here. I'm seeing a little thing with LinkedIn. So everybody, let's see. Well, let's put a thing in here. I don't think people can comment.
I thought it was just me on my end.
No, you're correct. So
beverage.
So it's showing that we're live on LinkedIn, or we're live on YouTube, but LinkedIn, I've got a little question mark thing, and I tried to fix it here, and it's not doing it. So I'm not quite sure. But this can be watched after the fact as well. So we'll keep plugging along. So hopefully people can see us. We'll see, right? one of the things that we've gotten used to in this post-COVID world is, pretty much our technical issues going to happen. Yeah, they're going to happen because you have to deal with them. So we're going to trudge forward. So one of the things that goes on behind the scenes after the audit is completed is that audit needs to be uploaded to the owner of that standard. So we'll stick with SQF. So that gets loaded into SQF's database, and there's all kinds of metrics. So certification bodies are required to get the corrective actions done in a certain period of time. They're required to get the audits completed, 30 days in a certain period of time, and follow up on other issues. And so that's what the third-party accreditation groups are looking at as well, is how good is a certification body doing at managing that? Because if you're SQF and you're GG and you're managing these type of things, that's your product, right? You own this. And you want to take care of it and make sure that the people who are essentially licensed to do your audits on behalf of SQF, that they're doing it right and they're representing your brand, the SQF brand, correctly. So with that, right, there's mechanisms behind this. So as well, there's also a requirement for the certification bodies and the standard owners to have meetings. So there's two different main bodies with each standard. There's a technical advisory council. So as a end user, we have representatives for that. And I was on the SQF Technical Advisory Council for, over 6 years. And I represented food companies, right, that I worked for. The other side is a certification review committee, right, certification body. And they all meet with the standard to go over metrics and improvements and what's going on with the business and these type of things. And those are requirements as well that nobody ever sees kind of behind the scenes. It's how the standards are actually managed. And one of the huge topics that would come up at every single meeting, Joe, you're going to smile when you see this too, right, is auditor calibration, right? So when we say auditor calibration, Joe, what do we mean by that?
What do we mean by it? We mean that me as an auditor, you as an auditor, the other people out there as auditors, if we're presented with an issue, that we all see it the same way.
Yeah.
That I see it as a minor, you see it as a minor, person X sees it as a minor. And I will tell you, having been on the operations side of the CB world for a bunch of years, that was the single biggest challenge that I had. I had 100 auditors. That's 100 different personalities. It's a minimum of 200 different eyes.
Hopefully.
If you wear glasses, you have 4 eyes, so it could be more. Getting humans to see things identically, it's not impossible, but it is a tremendous challenge. And I can tell you, you and I were just talking offline before the show started about how auditors see things that I just don't see it. And we'll get more into that later today. But the calibration process is aimed at, if there's 50 of us in the room, do the majority of us agree we see this as a minor or a major or a critical or whatever we're going to call it? If I see it as a critical and you see it as a minor, that's a problem.
Yeah.
I see it as a critical and you see it as a major, maybe there's some ground in between. But we have to, as an industry, stop interpreting as auditors. We have to stop interpreting the code, which is another topic on this list that I'm going to get all hyped up about today. What I'd like to see is, no, you don't get that. What I'd like to see is the end of world hunger, and I'd like to see peace on the planet. But that's what I'd like to see.
Right.
Doesn't mean it's going to happen. So the calibration piece is without doubt the single biggest challenge. That and getting bodies to do audits, but calibration part is, once you've got them on, in house, the calibration part is really the roughest part, no doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. And so part of this, right, another thing, right, you'll notice in the code, like with SQF, for example, is there's food sector categories, right? There's honey and produce and meat and dairy and all these different type of things. And the reason for that is the auditors have to have expertise in those areas, which is a good thing, right? So if my background is dairy and beverage and things like this, right? If I go out and audit a meat plant, I don't know, right? It's completely different. I'll walk in there, I'm like, oh my God, there's raw meat all over the place. Well, yeah, it's a meat plant. That's what we do, right? So that's going to be a bad audit, right? So you have to have those criteria. So there's all kinds of behind the scenes things where auditors have to have shadow audits and a certain amount of hours and expertise in those areas before they're certified to audit in those particular categories. Now, who are auditors, right? Auditors are generally like, people like me, worked in industry for a long time, retired, and got bored and said, you know what, I'm going to start auditing. And so they go through all the work and they become certified and they start auditing. Well, to Joe's point, they bring all that expertise with them. And quality people are quality people for a reason, right? We have gone through our career, and if we weren't successful in getting things done, it was because we weren't being good at communicating or understanding, right? So a lot of times it takes a pretty forceful personality in companies to get these type of things done. Mm-hmm. So guess what? That comes through with the auditor, right? That's how they do things. Yeah. So to Joe's comment, when they say things like, well, you should really do it this way, right? What they're saying is, that's how I used to do it, so you should do it that way too.
Right.
And if you let the auditor, they're going to start redesigning your entire system to the way they like it. And that's wrong, right? That's completely wrong.
Auditors are, again, as I mentioned earlier, we are human. We've got stuff going on at home. We've got stuff going on in our personal lives, and we've got stuff going on work-wise. And unfortunately, sometimes that baggage comes with us. We should try to leave it in the car when we start the audit. There have been days that I've been distracted by things. It's just, we're all human. We from a career standpoint, as you mentioned, most auditors come out of the QA/food safety, maybe operations field. It is not an easy lifestyle, as I think we all recognize, especially if you're doing 2 SQF or 2 GFSI audits in a week. That's 4 days of auditing. There's only 5 days in a business week. So you travel Monday, you audit Tuesday, Wednesday. Now you've got to hope to get a late enough flight Wednesday to wherever you're supposed to be Thursday. Drag your sorry butt to the hotel, and you're tired on Thursday. So it's challenging. I mean, there's no question, but it's like any other job. You know what you're doing when you get into it, and now you've made your decision, and now you live with it. So they're people. I mean, they're people, and they're going to have good days, and they're going to have, hopefully not very few not so good days. The pool is getting smaller, as I think we've talked about in previous chats. Back when I was at my last CB, we'd have our annual auditor meeting, and I used to poke fun of it, and I used to call it, it would look like an AARP convention, just an ocean of white hair in the room. And well, yeah, I mean, my hair is not as gray, not as brown as it used to be, and there's less of it.
Yeah, we'll get to you.
But it's a lifestyle where, and I'm not to get too far off the topic, but you require 7 to 10 years of experience. If you come out of school, you're in your 20s, 7 to 10 years. Now you're in your early 30s. Most people in their early 30s, if they're having kids, it's that time. It's a difficult lifestyle because you're not home a lot. Into your 40s and 50s, you're in the prime of your career. Maybe you're making, a really good salary. Auditors are not on, and this is something that we need to work on as an industry. Auditors are not the highest paid people out there. So it kind of discourages people in the prime earnings of their career. So now we get the retirees, as you mentioned, and maybe they're in their 60s and they don't want to fully retire. They just want to slow down a little bit. So maybe they'll contract audit, do 1 or 2 audits a month just to keep busy. So it's a challenging, just by nature, it's a challenging industry to find auditors, and there's fewer and fewer, and it's getting harder.
Yeah, and so behind the scenes, right? So I ran a certification body, and trying to match up the audits that you need to get done in the time frame it needs to be done and the available talent pool you have Oh boy, is that tough. So a lot of times when you call to set up your audit and you say, hey, I just got a new customer and they require a certified audit. I need that done within 2 weeks. You're going to get laughed off the phone, right? You need to be planning out 6 months or a year
At least.
at
I
least.
just did an audit last 2 weeks ago, and they already confirmed their date with me again for next August. And that's how you have. That's that's the way to do it. There was a client was going to leave one certification body. They wanted to switch, and something happened, so they went back to the old certification body with their tail between their legs, and the old CB was like, "We can't help you, sorry."
Yeah.
So I don't think the average person knows the complexity of the process. So hopefully this will shed a little bit of light on it.
Yep. And that's our goal here too. So one of the things that I would, and this is kind of a little tip for everybody here. So this probably works better at a big company than a small company, right? So when I was running quality at a large $4 billion company, I had 17 production facilities, 40 co-packers in the network. So I had some leverage. So I would contact certification bodies and say, hey, listen, I want to get my plant certified for SQF, right? In the next cycle, I want your business quote. So I would, shop to, 2 or 3 different certification bodies and get their quotes on the pricing for those audits. And then I would also say, and very few people do this, but I would also say, you're probably thinking of what particular auditors you want to use for these audits. I would like to see their credentials. I want to see their resumes. I want to see their background.
Yep.
And I would also, if I felt it was necessary, interview them.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do that.
Absolutely. I was just going to say, whether you're a 17 site plant corporation or a 1 site corporation, you have the right to see your auditor's credentials. And I currently work with 2 certification bodies, and both of them have required me to fill out their CV. I have my own, of course, but they want it on their letter. And that's the customer's prerogative. You have a right to see, if you're a meat packing plant, your auditor at least on the SQF side doesn't have to have any direct experience working in the meat industry. They could have done enough audits to qualify with enough hours. Okay, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're a meatologist, that they're a meat expert. So I would encourage companies to get to know a little bit about who's coming in.
Yep. And my main objective, during these discussions with the auditors, well, number one, if the certification body said, no, we're not going to allow that, we're going to send whoever we want. You're going to lump it. No, pass, moving on. I'm going to look for a new certification body. When I would talk with the auditors, what was I looking for? I was not looking for, all right, who's going to be the easiest auditor, right? That's absolutely the wrong way to do it, right? I want my money for this. I want auditors who are going to help me improve my processes in my plants and give me a good report of what they see. What I'm looking for is a sanity check, right? Does this auditor understand the real world of manufacturing, right? Or are they just looking at the standard academically and saying, well, this clause says this, and therefore I'm going to give you a major? Well, no, right? Everything is contextual. And that's why earlier when we talked about this dynamic between the auditor and the technical manager, why that's so important.
Right.
So I would say something along the lines of, hey, okay, Mr. Auditor, you're in a back warehouse. This warehouse isn't really used. It's kind of used for storage. And you're walking through there and you see some cobwebs in a back corner. How do you deal with that? Oh, well, clearly under 11.2, 7.2, facility, I'm going to give them a minor. Really? Right? Now, if there's cobwebs on the production floor in GMP manufacturing area, absolutely you should write them up. You need to be able to walk through those things and figure out what's important for food safety, what's not important for food safety, and use some common sense, right? I'm looking for common.
What did you say that? Those 2 words again?
The not so common sense. Yeah.
Single, which falls into the bucket of calibration. And without doubt, you and I were just talking again offline prior to this about something I'm going through with a client on the consulting side of my business. The lack of common sense that I see sometimes from auditors is concerning. And you know, if you're in a 1,000,000 square foot DC, and as to your point, you see, you know, a handful of cobwebs above 30 feet in the air above one of the overhead shipping doors, and we write that up, okay? Should it be there? No, obviously. What is the impact on food safety? And I think when we're citing nonconformances, I always ask myself, what's the impact on food safety here? Okay. And if it's a minor housekeeping thing, am I going to add value to this facility's food safety programs as an auditor? And that's my job. My job is to look for things that you haven't seen that will help you be a better plant. Okay. If putting a cobweb above overhead door number 72 out of 150 is going to add value,
right,
then I've got to realign my expectations. The audit process from start to finish needs to add value, right? And the auditor has a huge hand in that.
Absolutely, yeah. So I mean, a good way to think of this is like OSHA with near misses, right? You know, so in a plant, just so everybody's on the same page here, plants report near misses. So let's say, for example, there's a guy driving around a forklift like a crazy man and almost hits somebody. It's like, right? He comes around the corner. That's a near miss. It could have been an accident, but it wasn't, right? So they're required to keep track of those things because near misses add up into real world accidents. It's kind of the same thing with the cobweb, right? So as an auditor, you're looking around saying, cobweb, okay, all the things that Joe just said. Maybe their housekeeping isn't too good. I'm gonna flag that in my brain and see if I find other evidence of other issues in other areas, right? So maybe they're not doing a very good job now of cleaning the 18-inch clearance between the wall and the floor. And maybe there's some other stuff. And it gets to a point where the auditor says, okay, I've seen enough stuff now. Yeah, they're getting a minor for housekeeping. I'm going to write them up for that. I've seen enough stuff now where they're not doing that because that could potentially lead to something bigger.
Right. So if I see cobwebs everywhere, that's a different story. Okay. Because then again, it's what is common sense telling us, and is it now becoming a systemic problem? And I think, and that's what the audit needs to focus on.
Yeah, exactly. So part of this, I want to give everybody kind of a little hint, and everybody who's ever worked for me and gone through an audit gets the same thing. So I'm going to give it to everybody watching this too. So you should always start the audit during the opening meeting. Number one, show the auditor that he's important. Right. So when the person comes in to do the audit, it shouldn't just be them and the quality manager, right? It needs to be the plant manager, the entire management team. Everybody needs to be there for the opening and closing meetings because this is important. The quality system is not the quality manager's system. It's everybody's system, right? The quality manager just manages it. So one of the things that I always say is use your own language around this, but the context needs to be the same. It's like, hi, Joe. Super glad you're here in our plants to do our audit here. It's been a year since you've seen us. I think you're going to be really, really happy with the different things that you've seen in our programs, the improvements we've made in the past year. I'm really excited to show you all these things that we've done. So to be clear, Mr. Laino, we're going to be auditing to SQF version 9 food safety, food sector category 15. If there's any other suggestions that fall outside of that scope that you see, we'd love to hear about them.
Absolutely.
And that's pretty innocuous, right?
Right. And I think by doing that, you set the tone quickly for what your expectations are going to be during the audit.
Right. So what have I done with that, right? So let's say that we're going through and we're doing the audit and Joe starts talking about something on a particular topic. He says, well, you should really be doing this, right? Those words right there are a big tip off, right? That something's not quite lining up because the audit is always the same, right? The auditors always have to operate on this. What's the clause say? What's the evidence that you're doing it? Bam, 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 right? They're always evaluating that.
Right.
So if the auditor is straying outside of that first criteria of the standard says this, right? So 2.2 document management says you need to do this, 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 and this. And they start saying, well, you should really start putting everything on red paper. What I'm going to do is say, and you want to maintain a good relationship is, Joe, I'm a little sorry here. I hear what you're saying, but I'm not sure where that is in the code. Can you please show me where it says I need to have red paper? And Joe's going to say, Well, yeah, it doesn't really say
Really
that,
say that.
but that's a good practice that I did in the past in my career, and you should do that too. Oh, so this is outside of scope. So this is a suggestion.
Exactly. And it's what I'd like to see. What I'd
Yeah.
like to see. Well, what other places do. No, we're not here to consult. We're not here to offer our opinion. And again, this is one of my big bugaboos. Is when we try to interpret the code. Okay,
Right.
the code is a black and white document. It's black ink on white paper.
Yeah.
My job is to not interpret this. My job is to simply say, is what I'm looking at meeting the meeting the expectations here.
Right.
If it is, great. If it's not, okay. But when we start getting into methodologies of how you approached something, we were talking about this before. What was your methodology? Well, it's the code doesn't ask for what was my methodology. The code asks for, did I do this?
Right.
If I did it, then I've met the code expectations. And, if you remember under edition 8 of SQF, particularly, they had the OFI, right? The opportunity for improvement.
Yes.
And under 8.1, what did they do? They removed that. Mm-hmm. Because anytime I offer, if I mark it as an OFI, if I'm telling you this is an opportunity for improvement, what am I doing? I'm consulting. Yeah. Or I'm offering consultative advice. So we remove that, and now the auditor just has to decide yes or no.
Right.
And don't interpret, don't put your personal. Again, I'd like to see a lot of things differently in the world. It's not my job.
Exactly. Right. And so
I'm trying to think of something funny to say there, and this wasn't coming to me.
I mean, so part of this, right, is that it gets back to this auditor calibration, trying to get everybody to interpret things the same. And so one of the things one of the standards did was they created guidance document and said, well, okay, under this section, here's what we mean, and here's how you should be interpreted, and here's some examples of how these type of things work to try and help the auditors, try and help the production facilities to hopefully improve calibration so that everybody's seeing everything the same. To Joe's point, right? Everybody sees minors and minors, majors and criticals, right? You're not mixing them up. Well, unfortunately, yeah, auditors are, they're looking at things very, very literally, right? So if something is written down, they're going to audit against it, right? So what happened was the opposite of what was intended. So auditors started auditing to the guidance document and saying, okay, well, you didn't meet these requirements. And you'd be like, okay, well, where's that written? Well, it's over here, but that's guidance. Oh, no, right. No, right. And so that caused more confusion than it helped, right? So they don't have guidance document anymore.
Right. Absolutely. And it's to that point, it's the guidance document is there not for the auditor to decide if it's compliant or not, but it's there for everybody to gain a deeper understanding of what the code's intention is for that specific element. Right. Doesn't mean that should be the deciding factor as to whether something's compliant or not. But
right. And this gets down to, right, and this goes back again to and I cringe when I say this, right, common sense approach, right? You can't write a code long enough to cover every possible contingency under every possible situation, right? So people have to use their brains for these type of things on both sides of the table. Right. So one of the things as a company that's being audited is you need to understand the code, right? You need to know what the code says. You need to know what the changes are in the code. You need to keep up on this. Right. So, for example, one of the things that people are getting caught on is under food fraud and under food defense. There are requirements in version 9 for SQF now that you have to do a review of those programs annually. Right? You just can't write it and put it on a shelf now. Right. So the auditor will come in and say, okay, great. I see you got this lovely food defense plan. Can I see your last audit and check of your systems for your compliance to food fraud or food defense? Oh, we were supposed to. Yeah, you were supposed to do that. See under this section here. Oh, crap. Right. And now, the plant manager is over on the other side of the table rolling his eyes saying, okay, why doesn't my quality manager know that? Right. Know the code, understand the code, because that is the language of the auditor. right? The auditor lives and breathes that code language. You need to too.
As the auditee, okay, it is your duty to know the code equally as well, if not better than the auditor. And
absolutely,
I don't think you need to get into a I don't want to say the word. You don't need to get into a disagreement with the auditor about who knows more by trying to one up each other. And I've seen that happen.
Yeah, that's no good.
But you need to know, particularly with BRC 9 coming out February 1st I thought it was May. I was wrong. It's February 1st. It goes live. Okay. There are subtle changes. And if you are a BRC facility, you need to know those subtle changes. When SQF rolled out edition 9, there were lots of subtle changes. And in fact, after the first 100 days of edition 9, they came out with 4 amendments to the code that I would venture a guess. Now, 2 of them only pertain to food facilities. But I'm still seeing a year and a half, almost a year into these code amendments that sites still don't know about them. So it's your job as the facility to know, I don't want to say virtually every line, but you're going to be held accountable for every line. And there are auditors who are going to come in and they know that facilities are not meeting the mark on some of these subtle changes. One of the big ones is the water contingency plan. Okay. If you're on public water and you lose your water supply, you have to have a documented contingency plan. What are we going to do if we lose public water?
Yeah.
And I'm still seeing facilities that didn't address that. Well, we didn't know it was there. Well, it's been a year and a half. This is at least your first, maybe your second audit through edition 9. So as the auditee, I tell all my clients that I work with, I quiz them every now and then. I'll just shoot them an email. Hey, how do you interpret 2.4.3.12? How do you, what's your thoughts? And sometimes I'll make it up. Like there won't even be one. They're like, we don't see that in the code. Good. That means that you read it.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah.
Right. Because part of this too, right? This gets back to auditors are people, right? So if I'm an auditor and I'm going through and doing a bunch of audits and there's these new requirements and people keep missing it, guess what I'm going to look for, right? It's like, oh, every plant I go to keeps forgetting to do this. I'm going to make sure to check that.
Absolutely. What happens in your experience when you've been on the receiving end of audits and you don't agree with an auditor's finding?
Yes. Here's a real world story for this that happened to me in the past. So, and I'll preface it at the beginning of the story of use this sparingly, right? There's no reason, right? You want to be on the same side of the table as the auditor, right? Pick your battles, right? This is an example of something I felt was worth battling about. So I just happened to be at one of my plants when their audit was going on. And the auditor came in and he was a retired technical executive, right? He was like a senior vice president at a large food company, right? He knew the food industry very, very well. And he was doing a food audit and he'd retired and he was now auditing. And in particular, the section was, it was calibration. So we got to the section on calibration. And he says, I'd like to see your calibration records. And in particular, I was out in the plant. I want to see your calibration records on these load cells for this silo and this flow meter for this line and this thermometer I saw sticking out of a tank here. And I'm like, why? He's like, well, they need to be calibrated. I'm like, yeah, but that's out of scope. And he said, well, what do you mean? Well, what we have is we have a calibration program. What's in scope for the SQF program is all the things relative to food safety, right? I can absolutely show you everything we do with that, right? So with these particular products, right, it was your temperature and your flow and your pasteurizer and let's say your storage temperatures and all these type of things. Everything was calibrated for everything involving food safety. And I also had food quality, but this was just for food safety audit. And there was other things in the plant that the operations group used for managing their processes, right? So how full is a tank and how fast is stuff flowing? had no impact on food safety or food quality. And he's like, no, everything has to be calibrated and everything has to be in the system. I'm like, no, it doesn't. And so I said, tell you what, let's call the certification body. And so we got the technical manager on the phone with us, and we said, okay, we're having a bit of a disagreement here, and we wanted to kind of run this past you and see what you think. And so I stated my case, he stated his case, and she said, Bryan's right? Those other elements do not have to be part of the calibration program, right? Now, was the auditor happy about that? No, he was not happy about that, right? But if I hadn't done that at that point in time, this was going to be a needless fight that took place for weeks after the audit, right? So I made the decision to go forward with that and do that. This was set up because of my conversation at the beginning, right? That was out of scope.
Mm-hmm.
And so the auditor then begrudgingly agreed, and we continue the audit, right? Does that impact the relationship with the auditor? It can, right? So you have to be really, really careful when you do those things.
Yep.
But the main point of that story is that you don't have to sit there. If you have an audit that is you disagree with, right? You can start having those conversations right away. You don't need to wait, right? You don't have to sit there and take it, right?
You know, it's interesting. I had a meeting last night with one of those monthly auditor calibration calls with one of the CBs, and they mentioned that with this particular certification body, their appeals, the amount of appeals that they've received are up 50% from last year. And they were trying to figure out what's driving it. And it's the same types of appeals, just 50% more. And I don't know what drives that. You know, we live in an age now where everybody seems to be complaining about everything. And that may be driving some of it. You know, there's Yelp, and if we don't like the service we got, we leave them a bad review on Google. So that may be driving some of it. But the appeal process, to your point, use it sparingly, because you run the risk of being a complainer.
Yeah.
And well, I don't like this. Well, I don't like that. Well, this wasn't fair. Well, it doesn't have to be fair. It's a non-conformance based on evaluation. When you're going to appeal something, I always recommend to my clients that you appeal it based on science and not on interpretation. I helped the client once that they were written up. They were a vegetable processor, and they were using PEA. And their specs said it had to be, I don't remember the numbers, we're just going to say 200 parts per million. They were running, the auditor came in, tested it, and it was like a 350. But the manufacturer says it's safe to 600. He assigned a critical for the contamination. And we said, whoa, you know, wait. So we appealed it immediately. And the certification body upheld the auditor's finding. So now the next part of the discussion is what happens when the certification body upholds the auditor's finding and you still disagree with it. There is one step left in that process, and that is you can appeal it directly to the GFSI. And based on the science that we presented, the GFSI overturned the critical and never even made it a minor, which I maybe it could have been a minor. Okay. But the point of it is that there's options out there. Use them sparingly. One of my colleagues, she has a famous phrase, and that's use your powers for good. Okay?
Yeah, I like that.
That's a very powerful tool, the appeal process. Is it going to affect the relationship with the auditor? Of course. There's no doubt. But that doesn't mean you have to have the same auditor back next time either. Exactly. There are several, facilities that I know of that want a specific auditor every year. And it's not because they're, oh, I give you a 90, 99, oh, I give you a 97. It's because they're thorough, they're fair, and they're good to work with.
Right. Exactly.
So use that tool, that appeal tool, when it's appropriate.
Right. Yeah. It's because, sitting on the certification body side of things, and when people would appeal nonconformances, it was really obvious is they were just trying to score shop, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were appealing every single nonconformance on the audit, hoping that some of them hit and they can raise their score. That's blatantly obvious, right? It's like, no, I'm not going to play that game with you, right? Only do this if you have a legitimate concern, right? The other side of it too is complaints, right? You can also issue complaints, and we're talking about the appeal process here. Complaints are even something that should be used even more sparingly.
Right.
This is only an example of something egregious happens,
Mm-hmm.
right? Let's say Joe's my auditor and he comes in and he's just in a horrible mood, and his wife just filed for divorce, right? And he comes into that plant, and I think he may have been drinking. I can smell it on his breath, right? And he just absolutely decimates my plant, and he audited me to SQF, and I'm a BRC plant, and it's just an absolute disaster, right? You can complain on those type of situations, right? And these type of things are written up in there in the standards. But that's the nuclear option, right? You only do that if it's absolutely 100% legitimate, and that should happen very, very rarely, right? So kind of the hierarchy, right, of this is you have your audit, then you have your findings, right, with your corrective actions. And regardless of any of these practices, you still have to file, responses for your corrective actions, right?
Yes.
It doesn't matter.
And it's just, not to jump in, it's important to remember and understand that just because you're appealing a nonconformance, it does not stop the clock. You still must address that within your 30 days.
Exactly. So you may disagree with it, but you still have to address it.
Right.
That next level up then above the corrective actions then is the appeal, right? But you still have to do all that work with the audit. And then above that is complaints, right? So running a certification body, complaints are very rare, right? If you get one a year or less, right, that's normal, right? If you are getting more than, and of course, this depends on the size of the certification body, but you shouldn't be getting many of those, right? So that's something that's, and really is this, I've found that, right, this is kind of a behind the scenes curtain type thing, right, Joe? Because people don't see this, right? And these are the requirements for the certification body. These are requirements for the standard owners. These are requirements that the accreditation body under those ISO standards is checking for. So as a facility that's being audited, certification bodies, if they're accredited, have to have their own procedures as well, right? So it has to be a procedure on how appeals are handled, how complaints are handled, reporting metrics, how good are we at what we call turnaround time? How good are we at getting the corrective actions closed out? How good are we at getting the certificates back to our clients? These type of things that the standard owner and the overall benchmarking standard have an interest in, right? Mm-hmm. They want a smooth, efficient running machine.
Absolutely. Sorry, absolutely. So, we've talked about, and in watching our time, we talked about the auditor process, the auditor selection process. We talked about disagreeing or agreeing to disagree on findings, the appeal process. One of the things that we spoke about earlier, you and I, is about gaining trust.
Yeah.
And, we've talked about this on many chats before. As an auditor, I've said, when does the audit start? The minute I pull on your part, the minute I see your building from the street.
Yes.
We've started. Okay. So when I come into a facility and everything is well organized and well presented, and I say, let me see your whatever, let me see your food safety policy. And they go, here it is.
There you go.
Okay. Let me see your complaint management policy. Here it is. As opposed to, as you call it, the hunt and peck method, where they're like, it was here a minute ago. I can't find it. Is this? No, that's not it. Is it? No, that's not. It's just, again, sets the optics for the auditor thinking, Okay, they've known I'm coming for this audit for 3 months. You've had 3 months at least to prepare for today, and you can't find your quality policy statement. What am I going to find when I go out on the plant floor?
Right.
So again, our job as industry is to be prepared.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that doesn't mean that you wait till you get your audit notification to start preparing, because I think we all recognize that that's foolish. And as much as we all need to stay audit ready every single day of the year, and it's interesting to note that SQF releases the data that the score on unannounced audits is usually year to over year only a point or two different.
Oh, that's good.
From announced audits, which is great, right? Because that means that we're, as industry,
we're doing what we say we do.
Right.
Yeah.
So trust with your auditor. I've worked with. I pride myself on being good with people, or at least I try to be. And there have been some facilities that I have unfortunately needed to assign, criticals to, who have asked me to come back. I'm like, wow, that's pretty great. Like, I just failed you, and you want me to? You sure you want me to? Oh yeah. So it's in having the people skills for me to earn my audit client trust. Okay, they don't know me, especially if it's the first time that I've been to a place. They don't know me from a hole in a wall.
Yeah.
Maybe they got my CV, maybe they don't have it, but I'm like this stranger walking in and putting a lot of faith and trust in me that I know what I'm doing. I'm putting faith and trust in them that they know what they're doing. So building that relationship with the auditor is critical. I don't want to say critical, is crucial. Okay. But now we have, well, I'm going to appeal your findings, Bryan. I didn't like your findings, Bryan. And now Bryan's going to get called on the carpet by his technical manager, who goes, "Oh, Bryan, why did you say?" "Well, I did this and this and this." So it's a really delicate line. It's a very thin line between, having problems with a facility, not having problems with a facility. I think personality, people skills all come into play with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point, because this is an overlap, right? This is something that comes up on the chat a lot. Technical skills are great in any field, quality control, auditing, or whatever. You have to have the technical skills, but if you don't have the people skills to go with it, you're done, right?
Yeah.
You have to be able to diplomatically communicate this information.
Absolutely.
And I think my closing remarks on this, right, is this is a two-way street, right? So if I'm the company being audited and Joe is the auditor, right, I have to demonstrate competence and speak his language, right? I have to understand the code as well as he does. I have to know what management review requires and that we're doing that. And then I can show it to him and I can explain it to him why we do it that way versus other different ways, right? So he gets a good comfort level with what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. I think kind of the bottom lesson coming out of all of our talk here today is don't be passive, right? Don't just, kind of have some systems and that's that. And then you sign up for an audit and you don't know who's coming and you think it's on this day and you kind of prepared. No, right? You're signing yourself up for failure if you do that. You need to be actively involved. This is your quality system, right? This is how you should be running your company. Yep. This is not crap sitting on a shelf. This is your this is how you do business. You should be proud of it and you should be able to explain it so that when Joe is leaving your plant, he goes, yeah, good company, good people. And I would never hesitate to buy any products off their shelf because I know these guys are doing an awesome job. That's
the same colleague that coined the phrase "use your powers for good" also coined the phrase "be an active participant in your own success."
Yes,
and I think that's the key to every audit. Don't sit back and it's your audit. The auditor is just the tour guide.
Yeah.
Okay. Keep your hands and feet inside the moving vehicle at all times, but actively be participating in that event.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that's a perfect note to close on. So it looks like we had some technical issue with people being able to comment. So sorry, everybody. But this is available as a replay. So please go back and watch this. Man, Joe just provided a ton of great information here today. I'm also putting a link in here, so this will show up after the fact, for the locals account. So this is a community where you can go and talk about this stuff, right? So there's a public side where I list information on recalls, and there's a membership side as well where we have more discussions and videos and things of this nature with more content to help you with these processes as well. So that kind of closes out the show for today, right? So again, one of the things I always like to say is thank you for joining us. And this is an hour you've invested with us, and we really, really appreciate, right? This is going to help you improve and grow. And that's the overall objective with all of this, for food companies, for auditors, for certification bodies. It doesn't matter, right? We all want to get better, and we want to be able to execute what we do and what our roles are better today than we did yesterday. So
Absolutely.
Joe, thank you for contributing to that, because
Thanks, Bryan.
as you can tell, right, Joe's just a wealth of information in this area. So we're always glad to have you on.
Thanks.
So appreciate everybody. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you back here next Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Mountain Time. So have a great week, everyone.
Have a good week.
Bye.
Bye-bye.